8 million people that are displaced in the world today. And that number is going to grow. It's going to be expected to be 400 million with climate change and other big changes happening in the next decades, and how we can actually sustainably work towards solutions rather than what is going on today, obviously the political and the economic situation. And so what we're thinking is actually to also, because this is really, we want this to be kind of an interactive discussion, to also learn and exchange from each other, that I wanted to start off, like, and kick off with one simple question, and maybe to get to know, like, everyone in the room, like, first with a simple introduction. And then I wanted to present to you guys a quick video that I'll explain shortly. But one of the big issues I think we think about when we think about the word refugee right now is that we think about the camps, we think about the boats, we think about these images that have been, pretty well, I think, branded in terms of what you think about when you hear that word. And for us, part of the mission at Konexio, so we are a nonprofit organization that really focuses on digital skills training and workforce placement. Because in the path of integration, it's quite a long process. You have obviously asylum and trying to get into the country in the first place. Then you have the processes of getting the local context, learning the language, finding housing, very basic necessities. But the most important steps are actually towards the end of figuring out how to get into the labor market. Because without that, then you're eternally stuck. And we work with, so we work with hundreds of students by now, but we work with a lot of them where they've been there for 2 years, 3 years, and they weren't able to find jobs because they didn't know where to go, they didn't have programs, they didn't know how to find resources, and they didn't have a network. And so it was very challenging for them on the ground to do that, even though, for example, we're headquartered in France and we work with a host of government entities, including the Ministry of the Interior, the Department of Labor, the National Employment Agency, and there was still a lot of obstacles in between these actors and how they actually work with people on the ground. And so for us, part of our work is trying to do connection between these public actors who, for them, it's in their interest to see people integrated, because that means people who are contributing back into society for them, that are, in a sense, you hear political rhetoric about people taking government benefits when, they're not completely integrated with all the NGOs who we actually recruit from a host of 30 different NGOs today, and that list is continually growing, who send us students that we work with. And obviously the private sector is a huge component. We're trying to build up those who are interested in taking talent, those who are interested in sending coaches and mentors to work with their students, because a quite shocking number in France is actually only 12% of refugees have contact. And one of the questions we often like to ask is, who here has not touched a screen today? Either your phone or your computers, tablets. Yeah. So, and imagine some of our students coming from areas where maybe they've had access to smartphones, but to be able to integrate well professionally, you need to be able to write a good CV. You need to be able to write professional emails. And if that is one of the aspects that really blocks your ability to advance, that is one of the hugest blocks we see for our students today. And so for us, it's about getting them into the labor market, getting them the basic set toolkit of skills that they would need, and then focus on also working on the softer skills. So we work with companies including Salesforce, SAP today, to others including like L'Oreal and Chanel, out of, not just in the tech sector, but companies who would be interested in sending mentors, sending people who would be engaging with their students to teach them social codes that are not so obvious. And that can include anything from helping them look over their CV to their LinkedIn profiles, to preparing them for interviews. And we see companies as kind of the best place to do that, because these are working professionals who are already in the workforce, and they know what are, good practices or good tips to do when you are going for an interview. So that's very briefly a little bit about our work. This year we're training 500 students between France and Malawi. We are launching an international pilot. We're working in a refugee camp of 40,000 people with the UNHCR on the ground in Jamaica. And so you'll see video footage of this work. And our goal is to really, by in the next 5 years, we're aiming to be able to reach 10,000 people through our programs and our training. So we're here, part of the tour is to, get to meet foundations, companies, so through some of the other events we're doing here on this tour, and other NGOs who could be interested in partnering with us and doing this work. And part of it is just exchanging with people and learning their ideas and getting feedback on what we're doing. So I kind of launched that as a quick intro, but I would love to learn about everyone in this room and maybe a little bit about your background, your year at Stanford, and maybe if there's things that you would like to learn, especially from this discussion today. Does anyone want to start? The idea was to get a little sense of exactly what our work, day to day look like. And so you'll see.
What's the documentary and where's it being shown?
Oh, so the documentary is called, the series is actually called Foundation, and it's going to be released, it's released in France this week on VFM, but it's all in French, so that that wouldn't help. But it's going to be released on TechCrunch officially tomorrow. So you can go and see it, and it's distributed, I think, through Facebook. Their own channels as well, each of the partners who, and so we're in the season 2 of this documentary series, but the idea is to just showcase different stories as we're building our own organizations and showing also, and inside the personal side of what it means also to go through this. There's also obviously a certain level of sacrifice and that you go into it, as well as what work we're actually doing is. So there are 2 other I think entrepreneurs that are being followed here, but for the purposes of keeping this short, you'll just see clips on our end. So yeah.
Cette année, on nous a dit vous faites trop scientifique, il faut faire plus de business, il faut vendre. Et honnêtement, c'est vraiment pas ce qui me fait rêver.
Du genre, oh mais Google, Microsoft, ils vont le faire, et puis ça fait des années, donc ils repartent.
And that's the start, I think.
Whatever I'm doing, it has to be about so much more than just me as an individual. It has to be about how can my work impact the communities that I live with, and how can I use that to impact the vision of the world that I want to live in.
When you work with people and you see that there's a need to help them now, it means now.
I'm trying that way again and again. There's no time for good.
So the idea is that we're going to be training you guys to become junior developers. So
And at the end of the training, you should start going to interviews. We'll help push your CV out to our partners. So we'll help starting to do that, but you guys should also want to do that. And then these are the types of positions you can go into.
now this is where the real work begins, but I mean the motivation.
L'entretien pour chaque personne. Les premières 30 minutes, donc ils vont coder. Et deuxième partie de chacun va être en fait les questions.
Un truc qu'on devrait dire au début, si vous n'êtes pas pris, sachez que c'est pas contre vous, c'est parce qu'on a un manque de place, on a des quotas en fait. C'est un test, donc il faut les mettre devant le truc, et parce que une fois que tu es en situation de stress, c'est là que tu vois si tu as bien compris les trucs.
That come from countries where so a lot of the refugees there come from the DRC. There's some from Rwanda, Burundi, but a lot less. And there are obviously some of the political tensions that brought them, what caused them to leave the Congo are actually in the camp still. And so it's quite, sometimes there's some tensions in terms of how NGOs and how we work on the ground. It's also, we have to be delicate in how we work with them. But yeah, it's been a growing community that has just continued to increase over the years. And there's not good enough data to help us get a better breakdown of who is there, what do they need. It's a situation where when we're on the ground, I've talked to some of the families and they said, we apply, we ask for certain materials and they use that to build their own house. Using mud and metal slated sheets for their roofs. There's no electricity. There's no internet. Is
there sanitation?
They have outhouses that they use, but they're community shared between multiple houses. They have, when we talk to the sanitation team, they do have a series of boring holes they use as well as for water. So those are kind of the limitations, we're working with in the camp.
They don't really have much in terms of farmland either.
There's no farmland there. It's, what's one of the most unfortunate things, it's a lot of people who they have time on their hands. And specifically in the situation of Malawi, which is the situation of a lot of actually countries in Africa today, they're not legally allowed to work in those countries. And despite the fact that, the camp is 40,000, there's 18 million people in Malawi, which considerably is a small percentage. The political rhetoric of allowing refugees to work in a country that has a certain level of unemployment is decidedly unpopular. And so for those reasons, they're not allowed to work. They're generally not allowed to leave the confines of the camp area, which is almost an hour away from the main city. And so you're stuck in a situation where there's people who are stuck in a place, they're not allowed to leave. They've been there for a decade, 2 decades. They've had children there, they've gotten married there, and some of their family members have died in that camp, and they don't see a future. And so those are the situations which personally for a lot of the for the NGOs that work on the ground is also emotionally very charged, because you're also dealing with people's lives, not just facts and sheets and numbers on paper. So yeah, it's a obviously, and so for us, we're excited to be there, but we have a lot more people signed up than we can take, obviously, for the classes. I had some students when I was interviewing and talking about our programs in the camp who came and waited for me every day when I was there to see, don't forget me, I want to come and take the class. I'm ready. And so, we're letting, our team work with them on the ground, but this year we're only able to take in 100 students because obviously we have pilots to run and we need to make sure that we're able to get these students trained properly. But that's, relative to the number of people that are there, is still a very small portion.
How much of your material is in a position to be made into offline training packets that can be delivered as offline packages? In other words, from a CD, without needing for internet or live interaction, or it can be done through simulated live interaction, but then entirely offline, so that people can do it without needing live.
So right now, most of it is, and that's something we've had to change with the Malawi program, given that we're not able to connect with them when we and their providers, and then have to determine what will be the best services. And then from there, I think we'll decide, we might up the budget of the project to make sure that at least this is not the error, or that this is not the challenge for why the program is not doing well, is because we simply can't connect online. So that's kind of one of the big challenges. But trying to figure out ways to, can we send them all the information? So if it cuts, then at least they have all the exercises in an offline format that they can still continue to work on. Those are things that are important. A lot of them do have phones in the camp with data. It's just very expensive because usually what we have is, as a backup option, if the internet isn't working, we have dongles, which are these little devices where you can put your SIM card and use it as the internet connection. But it is expensive. It burns out the data quite fast. So it's a trade-off between what is absolutely necessary and what we can do to make sure that the class is still going to be running. So yeah.
What happens when the classes are done?
Yeah. So for us, and I was thinking, I'll mix in some of the answers to.
A lot of the questions I had are in that. So
okay. And maybe to kind of walk through the path of a student. I think some of you guys asked that question. So right now what we have is we have 3 main channels from which we actually get our students. Either it's social media, so we have a lot of students who contact us and find about us via Facebook, or people, or our website, so they can apply online directly on our forums. We have a lot more people who are coming more now from just word of mouth. So we had one student, for example, bring in 40 friends. He had a lot of friends. And we were like, that's great, but you can't have people come to classes if they're not signed up, And then we have a lot of our partners who, refer people to us. And those are 30 different organizations. So we have huge NGOs in France who work with 20,000, 30,000 people a year, to very small NGOs where we have a personal interest in working with them. So for example, there's an NGO, there's a few that work specifically with women migrants. And for us, it's either other cultural issues, but we've had we have 30% women in our classes. And so for us personally, we want to get that number a little more equal. And so that's one of the issues. So usually what happens is we have students who sign up. If they're not able to, connect digitally to be able to fill out the Google form. What we'll have them do is have the partner organization, the social worker, work with them to fill it out. Then we do bring everyone in for an interviews. Currently we have about 3 to 4 days every semester where we pass through about 300 people. So it's pretty intensive. They have 20-minute windows. We pass through a lot of people where we test their motivation, their French level. We do a diagnostic because a lot of people actually will say, I know digital, I know how to do certain digital tasks, and then we ask them a simple task like open a window on the browser. They can't do it. And so for us, it's also to actually test their abilities, and then we have different levels in our training blocks, which will then match them to. And based on their availability, and based on their entry levels, we'll orient them into a class. And so our classes are quite varied in terms of the different levels. We have people who are there very much for the basics. For example, in the US maybe it's a different case, but in France, unfortunately, the digital services, they have an initiative called All Digital by 2022, which means all government services that you can imagine today are digitalized. So today already 2 of the big ones, including social welfare and unemployment insurance, are digitalized in France. So if you don't know how to go online and use the platform, you can't get access to rates, which is a huge issue. Imagine if that happened in the US. People trying to sign up for their unemployment, insurance, other kinds of benefits.
So there's no fellowship.
There's no, so right now even, you can go into the agency now, but they have computers for you to use in the agency. So it's a very, and so for example, we recently, the 17th of April, which is next Wednesday, we're officially launching a partnership with the Postal Bank in France, where they've had a lot of people come to them, and they're flooded in the local agencies where people come to them with simple tasks that can be done online, but the people don't know how to use that. And so for them, it's a government they're just over flooded with requests. And so we're starting a partnership where they will start orienting people they feel like could use and benefit from training to our centers instead. So it's for them it's a win-win situation because for us we do want to have better sourcing, and for them it's less people who come in every day for simple requests that can be referred elsewhere. And so after the process, depending on the training, so the basic digital blocks, the idea is some people leave at a certain level where they're able to master these skills. Some of them might have current jobs, some of them don't. We do have training tracks where we specifically, you were seeing in the first few minutes, where we have a developer track where we do orient people. And that's much more selective. And I'll get to the selection of who we pick, we don't pick, but that we selected a quarter out of all the candidates who showed up. But it's also a reflection in the sense of not everyone wants to become a developer. And in France, unfortunately, they're under a government policy right now where they're just training people to become developers because they find it's an easy way to get a job. But when we talk with government and the unemployment agencies, they're saying that a lot of people actually don't go through with the trainings. And 7 out of 10 people who've gone into the trainings had no idea what code or any of that was before. And so it's a mismatch in terms of people's initial maybe needs or their interests and what they actually got matched and placed into. And so depending on the tracks, we have people that lead with a certain basic set of skills. And out of the pathways, we see 3 main tracks. People either go into jobs, so we have people who now work as developers who work in startups, who work with bigger companies, so people place in L'Oreal, Starbucks, some of these big companies who've actually pledged to take refugees. We do have people in a second category who actually continue their education, who choose to go to a master's program or a university program to get a degree, because in France at least, compared to the US, they really do look out for what diploma, what is that title kind of mark next to your degree or your title. And then the third category is we have a small group of entrepreneurs. We have about a dozen students now who've decided to launch their own projects and who've been able to use that, because I think one of the really cool things about what you can do with this is a lot of them are very motivated, very hardworking, and they can hustle. And so the idea is for them to be able to use whatever they have. So we have surveys we've asked what have you been using part of the classes that have helped you. And so one student was saying that I used it to build a simple website, and then now I can use that to sell my services. Or someone who was actually a lady who worked in cleaning services for 14 years, and she came to us and said, I needed, one day actually my boss gave me a tablet, to actually look up where my next meeting was, to write notes. And even though I work as a cleaning person, I don't know how to use, a digital tool like a tablet. And so she made me upskilled to kind of stay in that job. And so it is quite varied in terms of where people's tracks are. Our motivation is just to make sure we take the people, make sure we know what their needs are, because at least in France, the terms digital and IT and they get mixed up, and people come in thinking, I want to become a coder because I've heard that this is what will give me a job, whereas in reality, they actually probably need just a basic digital training course. And so the idea is for us to also be clear, like this is what could be a better option for you, and this is what you might actually more realistically want, rather than just telling you this is good for you and because there's a job there. And we don't want to mislead people either. So I don't know if that responds to a lot of that.
I guess just, so in terms of the Malawi side of this and the pilot, so I for work within a UNHCR refugee camp in Burundi, and it's like what you're saying is a very similar situation. People are more concerned about how they're going to build their house than anything else, or like tensions that are going on in the camp and things like that, and they've been there for so long. So in France, I understand that you're saying, people can get these jobs or these 3 different sorts of outcomes from the training. In the camp, what do you see as the outcome of people who go through this training, And also, I guess as a side question, do you find that the people who are really lining up to do this are of a younger age, or not? There's no specific age group or anything? Yeah. No, I'm interested.
Really good question for the segue into that. So for obviously logistical reasons, since they can't legally work, they're not allowed to leave the camp. And right now their resources are mainly humanitarian aid. So they line up, and they queue for their portion of rice and or other basic staples. That's how they're able to survive. And there's clothing donations, and so there's not really income coming into it unless there's some that do side jobs here and there. But for us, it's a pilot program where we do the basic training course, and then the second phase, we actually align them with freelance opportunities. So they're not legally, and this is something we were checking with lawyers to figure out, they're not going to be in competition with local Malawians because they're not fighting for the same types of work. And so on one hand, there's 2 channels. We sign them up for the big freelancing platforms, so 5R, Upwork. And we show them also there's a soft skills behind it. You have to know how to sell, communicate, negotiate with clients online. And then there's a second channel where we started receiving 2 to 3 different requests. Actually, Stacy, the China, there's this company from China who actually has a lot of transcription and tasks that need to be done, who contacted us saying that this could be really interesting for us. We have a lot of tasks that need to be translated into English, and are there ways to work with your students specifically?
Yeah, this was my sending out to all of the we work in the world. They sent me where I sent it to, and then I get a message back from China. So we're this one.
So I'm talking to the lady, and we're figuring out. But we also have 2 to 3 other companies who've actually reached out to us and are interested in basically sourcing digital work to us. And so that's an idea for them, is that obviously we're not talking about in terms of an hourly rate. It's not the most amazing rates, but for someone to be able to get their feet on the ground and to start gaining experience and making an income for themselves that they previously had no option to do before, this is a real opportunity. So the program we're starting with Malawi right now, it's going to be 100 students this year. We're going to start increasing that in the next few years. And then the partners we're working with on the ground, UNHCR and another large NGO called Jesuit Refugee Service. They are in over 30 different countries, and so they're in Jordan and Lebanon and other places where some of these types of similar opportunities could also be something we're going to go and do for as well. And then maybe the second part to your question was.
I was just wondering, what is the interest coming from, everybody or a lot of different kinds of people in the camp, or is it mainly young people, or Yeah.
So right now, I think it's quite similar between who we work with in France and who we work with in Malawi. Most of our public is between, almost 75% of them are between 18 and 30 years old. We don't have an upper age bound. We do work with young adults, so we do start at 18. We've had a lot of requests to work with kids, and that's something we won't go to. But I think as any other organization has to face, we have to make a triage somewhere and start somewhere. And so we decided to start with the working population. But our oldest student, I think, is 68. So we've had some.
In terms of kind of back to the point about the working age of the population, many of them, in some cases, have had other careers before they've come here. So. Have you been able to sense how many of them have leveraged their prior career and maybe taken advantage of the additional digital skills training to merge the two? Like maybe they were manufacturing small art objects or products or something at home, or maybe they were a cleaning service example. And have they been able to leverage that to build up what they're already an expert in when they were in a functioning society before they became a refugee, or are they really transitioning into a new space entirely, where unfortunately you could be 68, but you could be competing with a 20-year-old because you both have the same skill level in that respect.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think it reflects, because I was talking to a bunch of NGOs earlier today and yesterday, including the IRC. So maybe back to Gary and even John's questions about like U.S. immigration policy. What's really interesting is that both, at least there are initiatives in both France and the U.S. right now, where there are obviously jobs that are harder to fill. And unfortunately in France, they set up this program called HOPE in France, where they place people in low-skill jobs. And I think, there's definitely arguments on both sides for how you want to approach this. And on one hand, I think there are people who really do want to work, are motivated. They want to start being, able to earn income for them and their families. That's important. But there is still some people where that is not a good fit. And you have people who, have been, 10, 12 plus years working in a management role, and then they're sent to work as construction workers. And so you do see a mismatch, and it feels like a social, demotion. Yeah, like a failure, or a social instead of an upward mobilization, kind of a downwards with their current abilities. And so part of our work, is try to figure out, on one hand, there are people who can go into new roles, and so those are kind of the developer type roles that we see where it's a much more intensive track. You have a few months to go into that, but it allows you to go into these more high-skilled roles. And then the upskilling parts, which we find really interesting, is that there's a lot of gaps, I think, when you talk about digital skills. So, for example, a common example we give is that and it's surprising for us, we found that 1 out of 2 young people who come into our classes, most of them, if you ask them all, do you know how to use digital skills? They think Facebook and Snapchat, and I know digital, which is, often it's the perception. And unfortunately, when we talk about the more, serious types of roles where you need to be able to, talk with employers, send out your CV, go onto the unemployment insurance platform in France, which is even hard for French people to navigate. It's really, really hard for them, and I think first of all is to make sure that they understand where their kind of gaps in knowledge are. And some of them come from backgrounds where maybe they've thought that they've mastered certain skills, and when we do the real diagnostic, they don't. And so we have, on the end of trying to be able to upskill people and make sure that they are prepared for certain job roles, we try to identify those gaps first. And make sure that, for whatever they're going into. And what's really interesting is we were working with there's a future work initiative at the Harvard Business School. And when I was talking to one of the professors, he was saying this similar to, a lot of times you think you need, a computer scientist or data scientist, but a lot of times what people need is just a good, being able to master Excel pretty well. And being able to actually just to do simple data analysis, be able to do, you can do a lot with, less of the tools that we can, So I think I was trying to go through some of the questions. I was thinking maybe for going back to Maddie, your questions about social divisions in France and working in different ecosystems. And I think maybe this would be interesting for George on your end of talking about how do you work in very complex social environments. It's interesting because I feel like it's like any political negotiations. You have allies, and then you have not enemies, but you have people who are not as much on your side. Just as we're facing in France, rising right movements across all Europe, you feel like there's we have the Gilets jaunes, these people who have been protesting for literally for 4 months. And you know, there are obviously there's government, there's tensions within the government. We've been able to work with certain allies who, you know, on one hand, you know, they do see a necessity and an economic argument behind migration as well, which is that if you have people, on average, you know, in Europe, I think the rate for people to be integrated and for humanitarian migrants to have the same employment levels as normal locals, that's 20 years in Europe, actually. So it's a really long time. And you sort of ask the question of why is it so long? It's, you know, almost a generation for people to have that same insertion rate in the labor market. And so I think people see the benefits of having someone, instead of waiting 5 years for them to get their first stable job, 2 years, and being able to cut out, you know, other benefits and other things that they would have to pay for. And so for them, we try and identify some of these actors who are open and want to work with us. Obviously, there's some, you know, government actors who feel like, no, we're always going to work with the 2-3 big NGOs that have been around for the last 30-40 years. Unfortunately, there are some actors, but we've been able to find pockets within those. So we're part of a working group for the French. There's an interministerial delegation for refugee integration, and you know, obviously they have projects. One of their big projects is trying to change how people think about refugees too, because I think one of the big issues in France is we've had journalists come to us and say, can you give us an image of someone suffering? You know, literally, instead of saying that we actually want images of someone succeeding, like, you know, in what they're doing, because if we keep seeing the same image, then we would never break stereotypes of what a refugee wants. And then we're like, okay, like, you know, that's, you know, I guess it's a start, but if you are trying to brand yourselves as supporting refugees and doing all this work, obviously we know, you know, at the end of the day, it's also your public image and you want to, but, you know, if you're going around and just going to show one story because you have one person that you've hired, and oftentimes it's very, you know, it's a fine line for us to say it's not, you're not trying to take someone as a pity case, just to say like we took a refugee because they're a refugee, but they're actually someone you value like economic as a talent as anyone else. They just happen to have this other status, and so that's you know a line. But I think there's ways that we can work with companies to change it, and so that they don't see these people as anything different and not, you know, as lesser than in any way, but that they're just as talented. They just happen to be more diverse. And we try to say that, you know, you have someone who is probably actually bilingual or trilingual because they often speak English, maybe they speak Arabic. They're able to communicate, and, you know, in, you know, the tech world right now, you know, having English is almost, you know, it's a necessity even in France. And so I think we try to position talent in a different way where they're not seen as just a pity case that a company will take on because they will, you know, be able to have a nice PR campaign, which unfortunately there are companies around who do that, but that there are also those who can see a longer term collaboration. And I think it fosters a more productive conversation because then you don't have companies who just say, oh, I'll do this year, but you want them to come back as well. And it's not a,
yeah, so kind of on a related point, how involved are the companies in shaping the curriculum? Or more specifically, can the companies then shape the curriculum based on what they believe the requirements are 12, 18 months out, and therefore they can build their workforce
so,
very specifically to their requirements?
I'll give an example of one company in a partnership we're developing. There's some, and so for us, I mean, we segment the market too. So I mean, we run it like we're almost like, you know, an enterprise and thinking about how, you know, we pitch different clients. Some of the big companies, I think, it depends on what their needs are, but we do see eventually in the long run that most of our clients might actually be smaller companies, and who, you know, might need one talent, but we need to figure out how to adapt. Right now, some of our bigger partnerships with these, you know, Fortune 500 big companies, for example, L'Oreal, we're starting to work with them because right now they have a department called the Website Factory, where it manages 40 out of 80 brands of L'Oreal in the world, which means on a day-to-day basis, 10,000 web pages that need to be updated, which means all this content that needs to be created. Right now, they work mainly with, you know, private like subcontractors that are just, you know, normal companies. And so we've started to negotiate a partnership with them where, you know, they can work with us. We can send them 1 or 2 talents that would be like, you know, in a starting basis, but rolling, where we would train them to be not necessarily all the way to be developers. These are people who are doing webmasters, have basic sufficiency of what a CMS is, the front end languages for development, but they don't need to go all the way to be able to know, the back end side. And so that's something where we had to develop more specifically for this company, where they've requested a specific skill set, a specific need, and that's one example.
I guess to that point, I mean, from my personal, I guess experience at a startup, we hire people that come out of a program like General Assembly, which I mean, they produce people with like a certain standard or a skill set level, but even with that sort of like training, we still have a bit of a gap between actually having them as a functional employee versus someone who just like knows the fundamentals. So I guess I'm curious if you guys do anything more along the lines of like a part-time kind of like to bridge a gap, like part-time program where they're still maybe learning everything from your curriculum, but they're also starting to kind of insert themselves in a given team or like workplace.
Yeah, and so I think France has more flexible contracts that you can do. So there's two things we do. We have a program, we actually have a prior 3 to 6 month internship they do. So it's very much, we pitch it to companies, they're learning on the job. They don't have the same pay rates, obviously, as a full-time person. And for them, it's to make that bridge between their, training and the first experience that they have.
Yeah.
But there's also a second contract type that we have in France. So we're also a certified training provider. It took us like 6 months to get that label, which is considered actually fast in France. For us, what we do is you can actually have companies who start, and it's called apprenticeship contract. That's the legal status of it, where they will do something like, it's intermittent. You do like a few months of training, you go into the company to do maybe some, amount of their internship, and they go back, and it's a few blocks. But during this whole time, they do have a salaried status within the company. But for the company, their benefits, because it's a little bit lower than what you might actually expect to pay on the market. And for them, it's a way for the government to entice people to take apprentices that, because you're invested in training this person, you're much more likely to keep the talent at the end of the contract than just like leave them to go somewhere else, because now you've spent months working with them. So I think that those are flexible, but I don't know if like in the US what do you guys do in your situation?
I think different people do different things, but for me, I mean, sometimes we even do kind of like, if someone wants to contribute and like learn, it's almost kind of like an informal apprenticeship, right? So like, we can kind of like teach them, and then once they get to the point where they can actually contribute, then we bring them on. It's like, so maybe it's slightly different, but to me that seems like a really good way to, it seems like some of it may be related to like stigmas related to, someone being a refugee. Maybe they have the right skill sets, but they may come in and it has nothing to do with them being a refugee. It's just the fact that maybe they haven't worked in that team environment yet. They haven't like applied their skill sets yet, and people may kind of wrongfully, tag that person as saying, hey, they're not able to contribute for whatever reason. So I don't know. It just seems like something that can bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we see is actually what's harder for the person is they actually have the technical capabilities, but they don't have the soft skills necessarily. Or like in different cultures, different things are valued, being super extroverted or introverted, or, things like eye contact, punctuality. And so I think those are the things we find is harder for our students, because maybe they don't know how to interact, and they might freeze up when they talk to someone. And so how do you get them to, so like a lot of the soft skills training, so we don't do soft skills training by ourselves, it's always with the company. So like Salesforce, like we do soft skills trainings where we're always in the company headquarters, and our students go in and, they work with these coaches in the companies, because then it's, they have that direct feedback. It's like, you shouldn't have said this, or, that's considered impolite, things like that, that happen. But it's very much like things that might be evident for us might not be for them, because we had issues, for example, of students coming in late, like huge issues, and I think it came back to something that was actually quite cultural or just misunderstandings. And so, yeah, those might come off as, just how you perceive yourself and how you do it in a different culture might really change. So even for CVs, for example, I was talking to a bunch of people yesterday at the event afterwards, and they found it very weird that in France, you have to put your picture, your marriage status, how many kids you had, your birthday on your CV, which would be considered almost discriminatory in the US. So like different practices like that, for example. I don't know, Tracy, how much time you have?
What I wanted to do is actually just as you as a founder, I thought it might also just be interesting to talk about your.
Sorry, I
No,
have
it's very nice meeting you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Just to talk about how many employees that you have with full-time staff, and then also how you avoid burnout. I mean, you're working all the time.
A personal question. So we're so we're still a small team right now. We have 10 people, like full time, and then we have teachers that we subcontract, so they're part time. And yeah, so it's, I think one of the toughest challenges is figuring out how you hire and what you decide. I think for us, like the strategy of the last few months, we decided that we're going to hire people senior a lot. So the last 4 people I've hired have, on average in their respective fields between 10 and 18 years of experience. We hired a director of operations who was a director of multiple alums françaises, so the French school in the world. So someone who has and knows what the training world looks like. And I think in terms of time management and burnout, I don't know if I have a super good answer to that, but just that there's days where I dedicate for me I work 6 full days a week. That's what I told myself, and that's how I manage my time. I think it's just I get my full sleep. I get
Yeah, every time I talk to her, she's at a conference and she's managed to, you see her on her earbuds, and she's like sequestered in a little corner. So she's tethered all the time, as you can see on on the screen. She's like typing on her phone or tethered to her earbuds. And then the last thing, because again you're a founder, what would be an ask of our group?
Yeah. And I think, that's a good question. I think for us, I mean, obviously, being here, it's really cool to be able to exchange people with you guys, but, obviously coming from different backgrounds and experiences. I encourage you to, obviously we have different issues going on in the US versus what's happening in France, but to be engaged where you are in your communities. If you have interest in either learning more about what we do, potentially, because I think in the long term our goal is to be able to work here. So part of our, we're talking to a bunch of NGOs here and in the Bay Area, and to see if our work can fit into what the NGOs who are working on housing and language training and other basic skills are, how we can actually fit ourselves into working here. There's a lot of refugee organizations actually in New York, and so I know some of them based out of New Jersey as well, just nearby. And so I think part of that would be, if you guys ever have interest in either potentially working with talent or sourcing work, we would be interested and love to have that discussion.
Can I make a quick, just a 30-second thing? We're not in a rush to get done. However, I have a personal pet peeve about wasted food. So I've asked my colleague to put the food in the fridge. However, if anyone wants some food, have at it now, and then we're going to probably put it in the fridge because she has to leave. She's my colleague, but keep going. So I just want to we have a lot of food. I don't want to really go to waste, but if people want to go grab it, if not, we'll put it in the fridge. All right. Okay. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Looks like everyone's cool on food. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Let me get her.
Are there any last questions that you have?
So did you have a question? No. Your business model right now, obviously there are costs to the teachers and costs to your facilities, travel, etc. And then I'm not sure if I missed that earlier. What your business model is? How obviously your expenses I think are fairly apparent. And then when companies are paying, the companies who hire, they're paying placement fees, or how are they?
Yeah, so it depends. We're really split between public and private funding right now. So we're supported by obviously the local and national government in France. We work with a number of their agencies who also co-fund us. And then on the private sector side, we have a bunch of companies, so private foundations, other foundations who support us. Okay. But we've also, with the certified training provider status, as a training school, you get credits it's France has a training credit system where instead of just pure philanthropy, you're providing a service by training up someone for a specific skill set, and that way we're co-funded. But it's very complicated. It's usually 4 to 5 stakeholders who will fill and fund one training for one person, and so we work with companies in that way. And then
So there's no specific credit like a company would give you or a fee for hiring one of the graduates.
Right now, I think, for example, L'Oreal, we're starting to build that up once we have a certain relationship. But right now, I think part of it is just to get them into the market first. And then eventually, think about, more specific ways on either taking commission fees off of placements, and then actually responding and having some of the students actually do a coding application or a project, which would then, we would be paid for that service.
Do you have different locations in France, or just one or two?
Yeah, so we're expanding to 2 new cities in France in the next few months. One, it's up in the north, which were cities close to, if you guys heard about Calais, which was a lot of the migrants who were trying to get into the UK through the channel. And so we're working with cities up in the north. We're expanding also, because most of the refugee population, at least half of them, are centered in the Paris area. But a lot of them have to live quite far away. So we had students who were coming really far, like 2 hours away from to take courses. And so we're trying to also expand our regional interest, like within the Department of Paris and the greater Paris region, our training centers as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. For the first on her tour, she's going to Boston and San Francisco. 2 days. Running around. But anyway, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.